This is the two-point perspective diagram we most often see. We have a box that one side has its lines angling to one vanishing point and the other side that we see has its horizontal lines angling off to a different vanishing point. And all the elements on this box that line up parallel or perpendicular to the box also use these two vanishing points, such as this window and door. The other key thing, which we'll use in our drawing in a minute, is to realize that these angles are formed by the fact that an object gets smaller as it moves further away from us. And because a building is so large, the one wall can get smaller as it moves further away from us. And these angles are caused by the wall getting shorter as it moves further away, which is why when one wall moves away at a steeper angle than the other wall, in effect it moves away from us faster, and therefore the getting shorter happens more quickly, and therefore we have steeper angles on this wall than we have on our other wall. But the wall also gets smaller this way, not just this way. And if we find the halfway point by drawing the diagonals, we can clearly see that from here to here, the halfway point is much, much closer towards the end. On this wall, our halfway point is here. And while it's still well towards the far side, it's closer to, if you like, the visual middle than this one is, since this wall is not moving away from us as quickly as this wall is. And of course, in one-point perspective, where we're looking directly or virtually directly at this wall, the halfway point would be halfway along because we're seeing the whole wall pretty much at the same distance. It's not moving away from us in any way.
Let's see then how two-point perspective works out in this very old verandahed building in Tasmania. So it's a bit tricky because the actual building is surrounded, at least in the two sides, we can see by a veranda which extends out over the sides of the building, which means we don't actually see the top of the wall. So we're left with, on the upper side, having the angle of the veranda going to the left and the right. But we do see the lower edge of the building, although it's a bit cluttered with things in front as well. And then we do also have the approximately parallel edge to the flagstoning under the veranda. And because it's approximately parallel, it approximately follows the perspective pattern that the rest of the lines, the horizontal lines on that wall, follow to the vanishing point off to the left. So you can see me trying to work out now the foreshortening of the posts. I decided to start with the veranda top and the posts, and then I could position the corner, and then I could position the angles off to the left and the right. As you can see, I've made two rather careless marks on the paper, but I resisted the urge to start again, and although one of them really is still all very bare on the paper at the end, the other one I think is well and truly disguised. We can react too much to things that don't quite go right in the early stages, so I resisted the urge to start again. Really, in a relatively simple way, because I understand the principle of foreshortening, I'm able to see what's happening with those four veranda posts, and I'm not tempted to space them too evenly, and I get a long enough space between my first two and my second two and then the third two. So I get that nice condensing as the building moves along. And so I place the window that's closest to the corner and the corner post, because that's visually quite easy to do. And then I do the other window, which sits behind the post, the second post, which I've also already positioned. And that lets me then put the doorway in between those two windows, allowing for a little bit of foreshortening. But because we're on the closer half of the house front, it's a little more centered than the other foreshortened elements. And then there's a door on the far side of that furthest window. I then decide to put the roof in, and I get one of my angles pretty wrong, and so I correct it. And at the end, I don't think that wrong line can particularly be noticed. Now, I come to grief really on this right-hand side of the roof. I don't get that angled line going down towards the corner correct. It's up too high. And I also don't like the angle of the roof I've got along the gutter there on the right-hand side. I really can't quite work out. It's just not quite right. These angles are quite difficult for the top of this because they're almost horizontal. I was standing on an elevated position, so eye level is quite high across the scene. The level of my eyes when I took this photo was quite high, and that's why the top of the veranda is almost a straight line, because that's almost level with my eyes. It's only slightly higher than my eyes. But this approach let me get the bare bones of the building done fairly accurately. And I am at times measuring the angles with my pen. I measure the angle against the paper and then slide it across. I am drawing this actual size, which also makes it a bit easier to get the proportions correct. And by putting the tape around what's going to be the border of my scene, as well as making it look much neater when I take the tape off at the end, if that's an effect we like. It's a good way to get it, of smooth neatness at the edges. But it also gives me a more apparent reference point, because when I'm drawing elements that are relatively close to the edges, I can use the distance between the edge of the scene and the actual border on my drawing, because hopefully it's going to be the same distance. So it's just another way of giving us an extra tool, which is particularly useful in the learning stages of drawing. It gives us another reference point, and we still develop skills of observation and estimation in using it. Although, of course, if we were drawing this twice the size, we wouldn't have that advantage. What I'm trying to work out to do now, having got these lines fairly happily in order, except for the horizontal lines on the end of the roof that we look at. Not happy with those. They don't seem to fit the pattern. I really should have established the fan pattern more, because the lines become too horizontal as they move upwards from the gutter on that right-hand side. They really should be sloping down more. So I don't know how obvious it is to you, but it's incredibly obvious to me. However, I'm quite happy to share the fact that I don't always get it right. And in all honesty, I did not give it enough attention. I kind of presumed I was in a bit of a hurry. We had to go out. I was trying to finish, and I just didn't observe it carefully enough. And we just can't afford lapses in observation if we're wanting to make sure we capture things in a realistic way. And now I start to do some suggestions of the brickwork. Now, if you look at the bricks on the reference, they are small bricks, and so they look very small. And if I do a suggestion of bricks, I need to make sure I don't make them larger than they really look in the reference, because otherwise I change the whole feel of the building. And now I do some vertical hatch lines because it is darker up under the eaves here, the eaves of the veranda, or under the veranda, and this right-hand side is actually more in shade. It was an odd day for weather. It was kind of sunny and cloudy at the same time. There was also a tree casting shadow on the right-hand side of our building that we can't see in this scene. I really don't think that this vertical hatching worked terribly well. I think if I were doing this again, I would put it at a more significant angle. But that's what it is for now. I think in the end it's just become a little bit too distracting. Or possibly it's the sort of scene where I would have been better off using sketch markers for some ink tone, and got a variation in value that I could control more. So I just add some fairly broken gestural lines for the flagging. I don't want to start drawing that in detail because then it will draw attention from the building, which I still want to be the main thing. So when we look at our reference, we need to get a sense of what details are the ones that stand out in our photo and which details are the ones that we can see, but only if we kind of look at them. And it's that second group that we want to make sure that we suggest in our scene more than actually make a center of attention or focus by drawing them in detail. And particularly it often means we end up drawing them with a line that's really too thick. But even if we change pens, that doesn't necessarily mean that drawing all the detail works visually, because the truth is when we look at a scene, we don't see or take in all the detail at once. And so leaving out some of the detail and just suggesting it visually works quite well in replicating the effect in life of looking at a scene and just taking in the main parts. Now, it's really important if you enjoy doing buildings, drawing architecture, to work on trees and shrubs and the like, because so often there are plantings around buildings or visible around buildings. And it's a shame if we manage to perfect drawing buildings, but we end up with shabby looking plants all around it. But I did find this particular, I think, is it a fir tree on the extreme right, challenging. I wanted to capture the fact that the effect of the branches and the needles and the way they clump on this particular type of fir is different to the other trees that we see, which I think are more local to the area. I dare say this one's come from Europe somewhere at some stage in the past. And really want to work hard at the darker value of the green around the roof line, because that really just makes the roof stand out nicely. It gives nice definition to our cottage and makes the actual building shape itself look better. There is some shadow on the veranda on that side. So notice I used horizontal hatching lines for the ground for under the veranda, but I angle them according to the perspective pattern that lines going in that direction have, and just a bit of shade coming in from a tree we can't see on the left. And then we're getting pretty close, just looking are there any details that I want to do. I decided not to do the ducks because I just wasn't confident that they wouldn't look like little blobs at this stage. So here's our house in 2-point perspective. What do you think? 2-point perspective is a great way to draw architecture. It really can give us a lot of dramatic angles and views and shadows and contrasts. It's a great viewpoint to understand and be able to anticipate and therefore make it easier to capture the angles that we see. And I have many videos on just about any aspect of perspective you can think of if you want to check out my perspective playlist. But I think it's very helpful to do, especially at the start of our drawing, a lot of these relatively simple buildings in 2-point perspective. Things that are more than just a box, but don't have the complexity that grand architecture has, where 2-point perspective is even more dramatic to see, with colonnades and statues and small pediments and all sorts of architectural elements lining up on perspective angle lines, but equally a lot more challenging to do. If we can train our eyes to see the lines and to anticipate the patterns in simpler subjects with 2-point perspective, when we do come to draw grander things, we'll know what we're doing. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Hope you found this interesting. Of course, this photo is on my channel community page, so why not have a look at it and have a go drawing it. But whatever you draw, however many perspective points there are, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.